Hey guys, welcome to the Scholar Online YouTube channel, the channel that is all about learning. In today's video, we are going to cover the Assistant API. Now, I've been looking forward to doing this ever since the announcement came out, and it obviously took me quite a bit to also wrap my head around it because I wanted to be completely sure of what I'm talking about before I release this video, because this was all new to me. And I must just start by saying, whoa, my head is completely blown. My head is like right now. Okay, the Assistant API is amazing. All right, so before we get right into it, let's go through the normal administration. Remember to like this video that you're watching. Remember to leave us a comment because that really helps the algorithm with our channel. And of course, if there's anything you'd like me to cover, leave it in the comment below. And if you hear me say I'm going to link it, it's going to be in the description right under the video that you're watching. If you just go down into the description box and you click into it, you'll find links to everything that I'm going to be talking about here today. And of course, you'll find also timestamps to certain parts of the video if the video gets too long, and of course my contact information so you can get in touch with me. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let us get learning. So today I'm going to cover quite a bit, and I'm going to try and go through it as quickly as possible. So Assistant API, what is it and how different is it from what we've been doing? All right, so OpenAI is working towards creating what they call an AI agent. An AI agent is sort of a central AI machine that you can feed information, you can feed instructions, and you can sort of like start talking to it, and it will always remember what its main purpose is, and it will continue to communicate with you and achieve the purpose that you've created it for. It's slightly different from chat completion, because chat completion was just an endless conversation. You could be talking about one thing and then turn to talk about something else. You could be asking about the weather, and then after that you could be asking about what the price of Bitcoin is, and then you could be discussing, please share me some jokes. So a conversation could be random. It could be about anything that you want to ask the AI. And generally, when you're having a ChatGPT conversation, the AI gets its knowledge from all the trillions of terabytes of information that it has been saved in its knowledge base. Whereas when we're working with assistants, you have the ability to create your own knowledge base. So because an assistant generally has a specific purpose that it's sort of geared towards, and so your knowledge base will be covering that, and also you can give it whatever the information you want to give it, and give it a purpose and an instruction, and it will always work towards achieving that instruction based purely on the knowledge base that you've given it. So it's not going to go out and try and find information off the internet or somewhere else. It's going to always be limited to the information that you've given it. All right, in a high level, that's sort of what assistance is. And so let's cover everything that it does included in the Assistant API. There's quite a bit of objects, right? And this video is geared towards developers. So I'm going to be talking a lot of developer talk. I'm going to try and be as simple as possible. So if you're not a developer, you can also follow along. But Assistant is sort of geared towards, it's got multiple objects that it's working with. So you've got the Assistant object, which is the main object. This is the actual bot itself. This is the actual underlying agent that you create. And within this agent, you give it all of the instructions that you want, and whatever tools you define the tools on the agent level, right, or the assistant level. And then after you create an assistant, we have what we call threads, and threads and you can have multiple threads for the same assistant, right? So what a thread is a thread is sort of like a conversation between you and the assistant, right? So within that assistant and the instruction you give the assistant, you could have multiple conversations. So you could start a conversation that you continue, or you could start a new conversation. So that is a thread. And then within a thread, you've got messages. So messages fit into the thread. So a message could be a user message or an assistant message. So you create a user message that says, hi, can you please tell me more about this and this and that? And then the assistant obviously goes and it does its investigation, and it returns an assistant message and so forth, right? But it doesn't work the way completions worked, because the way completions worked was a chat completion. You would just create a chat completion object, and then you would send a message, and then you would immediately get an assistant response back. But the way assistant threads work is that you actually create a user message and you put that message into a thread, right? And after you've put that message into a thread, then you actually have to run the thread. Okay, nothing happens until you run the thread. And when you run the thread, then it goes and runs in the background. So currently you actually have to poll the run object to get responses about, to figure out what the status is. So when you run the thread, you will have statuses. When you initially run the thread, it will be in progress. Sometimes it can be queued depending on, how busy the API is. Then it can be in progress, and after it, then it can be completed, or it can fail, or you can maybe ask for more information depending on what kind of assistant you're building, right? So you need to constantly poll the run. The initial run object doesn't have the answer in it the way the completions API worked. You actually have to ask the run again, what is your status now? What is your status? And you're going to cover all of that in the tutorial, and you'll see exactly how this works. And then once the run is completed and you have a completed status, then you go back to the same thread. So after the run is completed, the thread object is going to now be updated with the new message, which is now an assistant message as opposed to a user message. And that assistant message will include the text, which you can then read and find out what the assistant has replied and so forth. So everything is completely different from the completions API. It took me a while to wrap my head around it because there are so many moving elements to this and so many parts that you have to run, understand what fits where and what is what. So you're in the right place if you're here on our Scholar Online, because we're going to show you, we're going to even demonstrate exactly how all of this works. We're going to use a retrieval tool today, and we're going to demonstrate all of this to you. So by the end of this video, you'll completely understand what it is that I'm talking about. All right. So the objects you need to know is the assistant object. This is the main object. You need to know the thread object. You need to know the message object, and the message fits into the thread. And then you need to know the run object. The run object is the one which, when you actually run the thread, and then there is also a file, which is like an assistant file. So what is a file? A file is any file, a physical file that you can upload to the API for retrieval purposes, or even within the thread, you can even upload a file. Even within a message, you can upload a file. So you could upload a file in a message or in a thread or even in the assistant. So the file can fit anywhere in here except in the run. All right. And then you have variables, right? What are the variables? Variables are the things you can change within your assistant, right? So within your assistant, you could have different tools. And these tools we have 3 tools right now. We have a functions, like when you want to run your assistant with the functions, and then you have the retrieval, and then you also have the code interpreter. Those are the current 3 tools that are available. If you look under tools over there, you will see them there. Okay, so the code interpreter tool, this is a tool that this is how you would label it in the assistant. This is similar to code interpreter, plugin within the current ChatGPT, where it runs a Python code for you. So you could enter like a CSV file. Maybe you want to do data analytics. So that would be the file that you upload, and then you're using code interpreter, and then it's writing Python code for you and giving you a response. So that's how code interpreter works, right? Knowledge retrieval is what we're going to trial out today. So perhaps maybe one of the future tutorials, maybe next week, even a week after, we will do code interpreter. But today we're going to do knowledge retrieval. What knowledge retrieval is when you give it specific files and within the assistant, and then the assistant keeps those files in its knowledge base, and then you can ask it questions. You can sort of this is sort of creating your own ChatGPT with your own data type of use cases that we used to see. And so we're going to be doing that and creating a chatbot that works only on the data that we've given it, which is, I think, one of the most common use cases, hence it's the one that I'm starting with. And then of course you've got function calling. This is different function calling from the function calling within the chat completions. This function calling is function calling within an assistant. And one thing as well that I'm still going to try in the future, this has not been tested, but I'm assuming this is possible, is that you could combine these tools. So you could have a retrieval and a function calling, maybe even a code interpreter, right? And then you could manage these within your assistant object or within your threads, your different threads could be talking to different tools. I mean, I'm curious to see how that works, but I can already see a use case for combining a function calling with the knowledge retriever, for example. So depending on, what the person is asking, then you figure out, multiple knowledge bases that you need to talk to, things like that, So we're going to have lots of fun on this channel. We've got enough content to last us the rest of this year and next year. Hopefully, OpenAI does not change too many things too soon, because we're just getting ourselves familiarized with these new changes that they've put up. So with all of that said, I mean, I've come across a couple of clients that I've been working with, and a lot of them are like, holding their heads and saying everything we've been doing for the last 6 months is totally useless, because we've been building retrieval bases, based on, llama index and all of those things, and vector databases, and yes, the short answer to that is yes. All of that you can just throw out the window right now, because all of that is completely outdated. You can still do it and it might still work, but the old API is already deprecated. So it's still actually working, but it's only going to work until a certain period of time, and then it's going to be discontinued. So you might as well start working on the new API and start updating your code as much as possible. But one thing for sure that I can tell you is the new API is so much better. It's way more accurate than what I used to get with the sort of, when I used to do those vector databases. Sometimes you wouldn't get a response, even though the file is there. The new API is much, much better. It works better. It catches everything. It is just, it gets more detailed responses. It's spot on. From what I've seen so far, you're better off changing your code anyway. All right. Now let's get started. What are we going to cover in this video? In this tutorial today, we're going to go through how to ingest files, so how to actually upload files into the API, how to then create your assistant with those files. By the way, you can upload files before you create the assistant, right? And then add those files to your specific assistant, specifically if you know what kind of files you want to upload before, if those are like the generic files. And remember what I said is that you can have files on many levels. So if you were creating an assistant, like a finance bot, like this one, for example, you might want to give it files on the assistant level where, your financial information that you want it to retrieve, you might want to put it in on the assistant level. But you can also have files on the thread level. This is where within the conversation you add files. So even though you've added a file there, you could still add another file and say, okay, based on this, if this is my bank statement, for example, and you attach the bank statement, what do you think I should do for my savings? And then it will look at the file you've attached, and it will still refer to the files that are on this level. So you can attach files on multiple levels. You can even attach files on the message level. When you're actually asking that specific question, you could attach a file. This is my receipt. Can you please add this to my this and that, right? So all of that is possible. What I do know is the current limitation right now is you cannot actually attach image files yet. I mean, that is what the documentation says, and that later on they will make that, so if you wanted to like add an image, like a receipt, picture of a receipt, you actually can't do that yet. I know you can do that on ChatGPT itself. So on ChatGPT, I've actually attached an image and had just ChatGPT read that image, but I think I used the knowledge, not the knowledge retrieval, but the code interpreter, because within the code interpreter, actually within Python, they do have libraries that can actually analyze an image and get the text of that image and figure out. So you can actually still do that with the knowledge retrieval if you wanted. Then you would put the file on the thread level, for example, and then you can still get that done. So it depends on what you're trying to do. Now, before I confuse you anymore, let's get into the practicalities. I know I'm talking too much. Sometimes I can't help it, but yes, I think you'll understand as we get your hands into it. So if you're watching this video and you're new to our channel, I love to sort of code as I go along. So get your laptops, get your computers, write the code as I go. Of course, you can take screenshots and pieces of the video so you can remember what the code looks like. If you want to do it later and you just want to watch like you're watching a video, it's really up to you. But these are the steps we're going to cover. We're going to start by showing you how to ingest files. Then we're going to go into how to create an assistant, and then we're going to create an actual thread that we're going to be adding our messages to. And then after that, we will then run our assistant the way I explained and the thread. And then after that, we're going to go and retrieve the assistant messages. And then after retrieving the assistant message, then you can actually add more. Because we see a conversation, you will retrieve the response and then you'll add more. So this is completely different from what completions look like. These are like many steps. They've broken it down into many steps. But what I love about it is that you have now way more levers to work with within all these many steps, within your run, within your assistant, within your thread. You have now, you have more leverage to sort of like, get really what you want out of it. I love the threads specifically because if you are building a multi-tenant application, currently I have to manage my threads within my own application, so I know which user is saying what, so that if the user's message are kept separate. But now you can still do that, but the assistant itself actually does a better job of remembering what you said and what it said, because it actually keeps the thread inside of the in the assistant itself. So that really has improved even the ability to have a longer conversation, right? So let's get to it. Let's start by ingesting files. Okay, so for today's use case, I actually thought, let me try and find some study notes, and I went and I Googled study notes, and these are the study notes I found. These are grade 12 from South Africa study notes. I just picked random subjects. So I picked this self-study revision booklet. This is a what is this? This is a business studies. All right, so this is business studies, and then I've got religion and science. We're going to talk about some different religions. I'm going to ask some religion questions, and then there's some other business studies as well, which talks about multiple business things. And the last one is entrepreneurship as well. Yeah, entrepreneurship. So marketing, costing, so I think this is just to demonstrate this to you. So you would have, let's say within an organization, you've got your organizational documents, right? So this is what you would do. So we're going to attach these as PDFs. And before I get started with this, I just want to give you high level tips, because this is, I think, is important, and this is how I'm going to build my assistant, right? So there are certain limitations you need to keep in mind, especially if you're going to try and build a multi-tenant application, which means you're going to have multiple users uploading multiple documents. There's a cost involved, right? The cost is in two parts. You are going to get charged for number one, the documents that you upload. I think that's probably going to be a bigger cost, right? Because all the documents you upload, OpenAI has to save them, and it has to keep them within its servers, and it has to obviously pay for storage within its own server providers, and in turn it's going to charge you for that. So based on their documentation, and I'm not going to go through all of that, but I will link it in the description, they are charging per document, per gig, per gig of storage that you use per day. So I think it's $0.2 per gig per day, but I can just double check this now to make sure. They charge on the pricing. If you go under assistance, yes, they charge 0.2 per gig per assistant per day. So if you had 3 assistants, but each one of them didn't even use a gig, you would still pay 0.2 per assistant. But if you had then more than 1 gig, then you had like 10 gigs in there, then you would pay, right, 0.2 times 10. So this can actually add up if you are building a user application with documentation. And I've seen it adding up with just normal chat conversations, so it will add up even more when you have documentation. So keep that in mind if you're building an application that is multi-tenant for users. Also include that and find a way to integrate that into your pricing, where you're going to charge users per amount of documents that they saved. Otherwise you might end up making a loss, because you are getting charged per document. And the maximum size of a specific document that you can upload is 512 megabyte. So 512 megabyte is actually a huge document, like, it's half a gig. And if you think about a gig is like a movie, right? A movie is about a gig inside, the typical movie. So half a gig is actually a lot. You can have if it was a PDF document, you could have tons of pages in there. Per one document. So I thought about this, and I thought, how could I be more and more efficient? Because when it comes to AI, actually it doesn't matter how the data looks like. So my ideas, and I'm gonna test this out, and you can try it out too, is if somebody's gonna upload PDFs, I'm actually just going to strip those PDFs of text and and create a new document which has just the text and send it to OpenAI as a TXT file, which obviously is going to take less space as opposed to uploading a PDF. Unless if maybe you got diagrams, and I haven't tested this yet whether OpenAI actually would read the diagrams inside of a PDF document. I don't know. That's something we can even try it out today and see. If there's no documents and it's just text, it might be cheaper for you to do that, and then you could end up adding more content with less megabytes if you could strip the text and send it as a text document as opposed to sending multiple PDFs. You understand? But that's for you to get through. But either way, whatever happens, you have a maximum of 100 gig per organization. So even if you're building a multi-tenant application, you are limited to 100 gig. And 100 gig is quite a bit. 100 gig is like a phone size nowadays. Like these new phones, the smaller ones is 120 something gig of space. So, and there's some SSDs that actually go to 100 gig. So that's actually quite a big amount of space. But if you were actually building a multi-tenant application, this probably will not be enough anyway, even with some of these data saving tactics that I'm telling you about. So either way, you might also want to consider, you can actually ask OpenAI to increase this if you find yourself coming close to the maximum usage. All right. So, and I think this maximum usage is just there for cost purposes, because obviously if they're charging you, if they're charging you 0.2 per gig and you're using 100 gig, I mean, you're paying, this is per day. So obviously this is already, how many dollars per day? So maybe this is probably just a cost management kind of thing to make sure you don't end up with like a bill that blows you out of the water. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get started with ingesting our files. All right. So I'm going to be running this here. All right. I'm going to create a shell. I've already written my functions because obviously I had to test them before we got here. And so every slide that I'm going to go through, I have a sort of a screenshot of the function itself, and you can see what I've written in this function. And this comes straight out of the documentation. So I will link the documentation for you and you can go read the documentation. But for now, just trust that I've read the documentation, and this is actually the code for uploading the file. So what you need, number one, is the file location. And the file location is obviously the absolute or relative path to where the file is saved within the computer that you have right now when you want. So if the file is in your desktop, you would have the path to the desktop, the file name dot the file extension, and that would be the location of the file. And then you would create the client object. And then after creating the client object, you would then say file is equals to, you would say files create, and then you would enter that location in there, and then you say the purpose is assistance. And then after that, you'll get returned the file object in return from OpenAI, and then you just need to save the file ID. So an important thing so when you're building this within an application, you're going to have a methodology in place to keep track of these things, right? To keep track of your file IDs, because if you lose the file ID, well, you're gonna need the file ID first of all to be able to add it into your assistant, to be able to add it into a message if you want to add it into a message, wherever you want to add the file to. You're going to need your file ID if you later want to delete the file. So every time you create these objects that I was talking about here at the beginning, all of them are built with the same structure that you can immediately get the ID of that object by just, after you've run it, saying that object times the ID, you'll be able to get the ID of the object. And of course, keep those IDs in a safe place, right? So let's run this. What is this called? Okay, so I'm going to first of all import this. Don't worry about what this is. This is just where I've saved my functions. So all these functions in here, I've already pre-written them, and I'm just going to run them as I go along, and they're saved for me in this machine under a folder called business, and the file is called GPT. So I'm importing everything in there. I'm importing all of these things. That's just what I'm doing there, right? So the first function here is for creating a file within OpenAI. So these files that I've created, the ones I've just opened for you, and I've showed you these files, this consumer file, the religion, science, all these 4 files, we're going to upload all of them and we're gonna get all their file IDs. All right, so so I'm gonna say file ID number one. Let me do it like that, and then file ID number one. Actually, before I do that, let me do it like this. Let me call this location one, location two, location three, location four. All right, so let's do it like that. Let's then just copy this and paste that so that we got all our locations sorted, right? So file number one, file ID number one. All right, so this is the first file we're uploading, which we're going to use location one to upload that file, and our first file is going to be this business studies number one. All right, and it's a PDF document. And by the way, you can save any type of not any type, but if you go into the documentation and you go under supported files over there, it shows you the different types of files that you can actually use, and these are for specifically for the assistant, and if you're going to be working with code interpreter or you're going to be working with retrieval. So obviously this with a CSV file you can't work with retrieval on it, so you just check which ones are ticked, which ones are not ticked. So obviously the code interpreter takes in more files, like I said, the image ones, you see. So the image JPEG, I've seen this with code interpreter working. So for example, you want to read an image receipt, you can do something like that with code interpreter, but you can't do that with retrieval. So retrieval, I mean, why would you wouldn't want retrieval for the document? I mean, the way I see retrieval working is text. I see a lot of text and PDFs, maybe Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, YouTube videos. Yes, you can strip the YouTube video, you can transcribe it and get the text out of it, and then do that as a text. You understand? So I think for retrieval, think of retrieval like a database, where you want to just be able to get, even zip files don't work with retrieval. So I think retrieval ends only up to here, up to txt plain. But that's all you need really for retrieval. I'm surprised that Python files are also there in retrieval. So if you wanted to save like a whole Python application, you could save a Python application in there and use retrieval to get the information out of it. I'm curious to try that out one of these days. But anyway, let's get onto it. So file ID one, we are going to get the file ID. So this function returns a file ID. What it does is that it creates the client object using the OpenAI API key. So you need your API key. You could have it inside of your environment, or you could save it somewhere. You just need to get it into the OpenAI initiation when you initiate this object, and then you say it's client.files.create. So using the create function to then create based on the location, and the purpose of that is assistant, and then we get the file ID. All right, so actually if I just do that, I just copy that function like that, because I've already imported all of my functions from this file. I could just paste that in there, and I need to say location one because I've just defined location one, and then that should give me file ID one. It takes a while, but not too long really. There you go. So just a few seconds and OpenAI has saved that file for me. All right, so if we have a look there and we look at the first file ID like that, this is what our file ID looks like. And I think I just want to save all my file IDs so that I do not forget them later on, when I need to delete these files. Because you are gonna get charged. I think if you look at the documentation, they say it's free until the 12th of, what is this? The 13th of December. Okay, so I'm going to play around and have fun until the 13th of December, but code interpreter is only until the 1st of December. So I have like 4 more days to do all of this without getting charged a cent. So this is the first file ID in there. And then let's do the second one. Just let me just copy this, copy and paste. This is now file ID 2. And its location 2. All right, so let me actually just do the copy that so that it will be easy for me to edit it over here, because then I can just say the third one is the third one there, then I can just run it like that. All right, that's the third one, and then the fourth one is location number 4. All right, the fourth one is that one. And then once we've finished running those ones, I just want to see what the file IDs are. So file ID 2 is this one. I just want to save it here so that later on, if I want to delete these things, I can get to it. And then the third one is that one. So this file ID 3. And then the fourth one is that one. Good. Okay. So all my files have now been uploaded. All right. So all my files are uploaded. I've got all my file IDs. That's the first step within our tutorial. So step number 1 is done. Let's get on to step number 2. Step number 2 is to create our assistant. And the way we create our assistant is you need to specify the model when you create your assistant. You need to enter your tools. And the tools are, I've explained what the tools are: retrieval, code interpreter, your function call. And then you need to then enter your file IDs if you are referring to any files at this stage. All right. So, and these are all the variables. You can vary all of these. And ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo 1106 actually works with the Assistant API. I've tested it, but the preferred one is GPT-4 Turbo 1106. But that's still a preview model, so you can't actually take that into production. But GPT-3 Turbo also has that server issue that it's always going down half the time. So, we have the same problem on the Assistant API, the same problem I talked about last week when we were doing the other one, where you sometimes don't get a response or you get a server message. It also happens with the Assistant, and it happens more with the 3.5 Turbo and less with the 4 Turbo. Okay, so you can just try out, but for now we're gonna go with 3.5 Turbo. Okay, so here's our function over there. We enter the file ID. All right. Actually, I'm going to do this differently. So I'm going to rewrite this function a bit, because now we've got 4 files. This function is written for one file ID. If you look at it, one file ID that goes in there, because this file ID is a list of file IDs. So if we got like 4 files, we actually need to add all 4 of them in here. So what I can do is that I can say our file IDs here. So this file IDs, file ID 1. Right, you can have file ID 1 because I've got all the different file IDs 2 and so forth and so forth. So I can add all of them here. I can say file ID 1, file ID 2, file ID 3, and 4. Right. So this is 4. This should be 3, and this should this should be 3, and this should be 2. Right, and then you need to just specify them in here. All right, so you need to specify them in there. Actually, it doesn't matter. I'm going to run this manually, okay? So I'm going to define my client first of all. All right, so let's define the client, and then we're going to run the instructions. Your instructions, this is where you define the bot. So in my case, my bot is just a knowledge assistant or a study assistant. So actually you are a study assistant, because I'm going to be providing it with study notes. Use your knowledge base to best respond to customer queries. Okay, so I'm going to use that instruction. All right, and then after that instruction, I'm going to select model 3.5 Turbo, and keep in mind you can use GPT-4 Turbo if you have access to that. And we're going to use the tools, the assistant retrieval tool, and then with that I'm going to enter my file IDs. Is going to be file ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Is going to be a list of file IDs. That's what you need to enter there. All right, a list of file IDs. All right, and then once you've done that, then you can run your assistant and get your assistant ID. All right, so let's do that. Let's run our assistant like that. All right, and so while that is still running, I'm just going to take this back to what it was before, assuming there was just one file, and so forth. All right, so after you've gotten that, your assistant ID is equals to this assistant dot ID, right? And you can have a look at what your assistant ID is. And I'm just going to also save it so that I've got it somewhere else in case something happens to this run that I'm doing. So we've actually just created our assistant. Okay, so congratulations if you're creating your assistant for the first time. Now you've got an AI agent. Well, you still have to do more with it. Like these steps are now very fragmented and separate. You do one step and then you go to the next one. After creating an assistant, then you need to now create your thread. So yeah, there's multiple steps to doing something which we used to do in one line of code. Now we get into our thread. What is a thread? A thread is actually a conversation. So the conversation between the user and the assistant is saved inside of a thread, right? And the very first message, and then it's saved into a message object. So a message object is like what we used to have under messages. You know, when we used to do the chat completions, we used to have messages, and you could have messages type whatever, role user or role assistant. You still have that, but now you actually get a whole messages object that fit into the assistant. Okay, so I'll explain to you how that works. So creating the thread, these are our messages, right? So our messages are a list of messages, and for every message you can define the role, and then you can define the content. You can also enter the file IDs in here as well. So you could have file IDs into the messages. This is if you want to like, if you were doing code interpreter, for example, and you are attaching your picture that you wanted, the code interpreter to analyze and give you the information that, like maybe a receipt, and you took a picture of it, you would include that in the message. You would upload the file the way we uploaded the file there, and then you would add the file ID in here, and then the prompt will say, please analyze this image for me, for example. You understand? But for now, we are not going to add files on a message level, specifically because we are doing retrieval. So for people that are coming for a customer service, for a customer service thingy, would not be attaching documents, unless if maybe, that is part of the bot itself, and then you also have, but if for our use case, we're not going to be doing it. So let's just say for our use case, we're not going to be doing that. So we're going to define the prompt. So let's think of our question. We've got all of our documents here. Let me find an interesting question to ask, right? Religion and natural science. Let's see. Religion and natural science. Religion, account of creation in Islam. Okay. Let's ask him, what is the account of creation in Islam? Okay, I'm gonna ask it, what is the account of creation in Islam? Okay, and that's a question. So that's the question we're gonna ask it. And after we've asked it that, it's gonna go create a message object with a prompt. It's going to redefine the client, and then it's going to create a new thread, and it's going to send us a thread ID. So we're not going to get an answer at this point. At this point, we're just creating a thread with the messages, right? So let's get our thread ID. So I'm going to copy that, and this function returns a thread ID, okay? So it returns a thread ID. So what we can say is our thread ID our thread ID is equals to this function with a prompt, right? So how did I not copy it completely? Yes. So this function with a prompt will return a thread ID, right? Let's run it. Cool. And let's look at our thread ID. Make sure everything ran. So this is our thread ID. All right. So we're going to go in there and paste our thread ID and have a look at it. All right. So what have we done now? We have created our assistant. We have created our thread. We have created our files, and we still don't have an answer to the question because there's no way to actually query the thread to get the answer until you actually run the thread. So actually the answer will still appear in the thread, but it will only appear in the thread after you have run the thread. So you have to run the thread first. That's the last step that we're going to be doing. So we're going to now run the assistant. When you run the assistant, you need a thread ID and an assistant ID. So we've got both of them, and I'll prove that to you. If you say thread ID is just what I said now, you've got a thread ID. If you say assistant ID, right, it's the assistant we just created earlier on, that's the assistant ID. So if we actually run this, right, if we actually run this, and I'm gonna say run ID because it returns an ID as well, and you also need to keep track of your run ID. Why you need to keep track of your run ID? Because you're gonna need the run ID to query the run status in the future. So the current run status might be queued or whatever. You're not going to have the answer now. The run status is going to keep changing and get updated. So if the API is busy, it might be queued for longer than other instances. If the API is not busy, it might go immediately into running and then you get your response. But it's not going to be immediately when you send the thing. So the initial run status will never be completed. You need to wait a little bit and then query the run status again. So which means that you need to have the run ID so you can use it to query the status of the run. Okay, so the run ID is that function with the thread ID and the assistant ID. And I'll prove it to you now. If you say run ID, so this is right at the bottom and I don't know if you can see very well. So I'm going to say run. No, I'm not going to run this again. I'm going to say run ID dot status. Okay. No, not, you can't say run ID dot status, sorry. You need to say run dot status. So anyway, so the way the function is, it's returning only the run ID. So if it was returning the run, I could have said run dot ID or run dot status. Okay, so that's why I can't actually see the status. But either way, the run dot status is not going to be completed. You need to wait a little bit. And then after that, so what we have here, this is the run ID. This is the run ID. That's why you can't say run ID dot status. It's just a string. All right. So this is our run ID. I'm going to put it in there like that, so that I can always come back to it. So this is my thread ID. This is my run ID. And now I can use the run ID and the thread ID to check the status. So if I run this function over here, which has now so this is the second function in here for checking the status. We already have the thread ID. The thread ID will never change. You can create another thread if you want, by the way. So if you had like a multi-tenant application and this within your multi-tenant application, you had different users, and these different users were all querying the same assistant, right? You would create different threads for all of them. And you could, how would you identify which thread belongs to which user? Of course, we'll get to that later, but you could use the what we call the metadata object within the thread, and I'll show you how to get to it. But OpenAI has already thought about all of this, right? Because it's creating it's creating this platform for all of us to be able to build on these APIs. So we can check the status now. We're putting in our run ID and then we're putting in our thread ID. I've waited a bit, so it's either failed or it has succeeded at this point. All right, so the status is now completed, so it actually ran successfully. So there are many, when you come to the different statuses, you could have in progress, you could have requires action. This is mostly, you're gonna see this a lot if you're working with function calling, because function calling sometimes will require you to maybe input back the response of a function. Especially with the multiple parallel function calling, because this is going to have that built in automatically in there. I mean, it's amazing what the Assistant API can do. Like, I'm excited about all of what I can build with this. I'm still learning, and I'm also still trying to figure all of this out. But we're going to build super apps of the future with this Assistant API. I mean, if you can just imagine in your head already what you can do with this, it's just mind-boggling. Then completed is what you want to see. So if you were running this in an app, maybe you would be checking for when run status is equal to completed, or you could check for all these different statuses. So these are all the different statuses that you could have. So you could check for if it's in progress, you can say wait. So you could run a function that maybe runs every 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or whatever. And if the status is still in progress, you wait. If it requires action, then you check what that action is and you supply it. If it's completed, then you know you've got your answer and you check for the answer. If it's failed, then you need to maybe run it again. If it's expired, well, it expires, actually runs expire after a while, because you only have a limited amount of time to do something with the thing before it expires. Or you could actually cancel it if it takes long or something went wrong, like maybe it requires action and you change your mind. You could actually you can edit your run object and cancel it, and then it will have a canceled status. Now, ours is completed. So if it's completed, we can move on to the next part. We are completed now. So the next thing is to retrieve the messages. So we need to go back to our thread and we need to retrieve the messages. So this is the interesting part, right? Because we're using retrieval, and this is for me the most amazing part of what OpenAI has done. With the retrieval, I could add up to 20 different documents in here. So every assistant can take a maximum of 20 documents. And these documents don't have to be related to each other. You can see here, I've added something about religion, and then I'm going to add something about entrepreneurship, but they could be related, they don't have to be. And after you've added those documents, then you ask your question. The retrieval API, it will look at your prompt, and it will look at the documents that it has, and it will search the documents, and it will find the best sort of balance between how to search the document and how to write the prompt for the completion. Like, it does everything in the background. However, it will return to you a response answer, which will be a text, and it will also return what they call annotations. And this is it's going to be references. So if it was like a retrieval, for example, and it got an answer, it will tell you which document and where actually it got that answer from, which is really useful for training as specifically when you are trying to understand how it got to its answer, which document it referenced to get your answer. So you get both the annotation and the quote. The annotation has got a couple of things that gets attached to it, but I'm interested in the quote. And I encourage you to, because what I did, I spent a lot of time playing around with what gets returned to figure out. And I thought for me, what's important is just weight the code within the annotation and the value of the response. But there's lots of other information that it returns that you can look at. And depending on what your use case is, you might be able to do that. But within retrieval, this is what was interesting to me. Within other tools like code, the coding one, it can even return the code that it wrote. Like it will return its thinking and how it arrived to the answer and the steps that it followed. So all of that is really, really interesting for you to understand how the solution was achieved and so forth. So, and you might want to print that to the user as well. The same way it works on the ChatGPT, where you use the when you upload a CSV and it shows you the Python code and how it arrived at the answer, you can actually retrieve that as well in the API and see how it actually calculated the solution, within the annotation. So that's very interesting. And when we do the assistant for code for coding, the code whatever, we are going to actually go into that and see how that looks like. I'm excited. Maybe it will be the next tutorial that we do, but for now we're just going to look at the code and the whatever. So what gets returned, so when you retrieve the messages, you need to get your list of messages. And the list of messages will include even your initial user message. And once you get your list of messages, you get the last message, which obviously is the last message on the list. For now, I'm assuming that it will always return the messages will be in chronological order. I haven't tested that over a longer period of time, but so far to date, it has been that way, that the last message is at the top. So if you now look at the messages at 0, it will be the assistant's message. And within the assistant message, you can look for the text value, or you can look for the annotation, which is like the file citation or the way it actually got the information from. So we're going to look at both the reference and the message text when we are retrieving our messages. All right. So I've already written this function over here. All right. This is exactly what I've explained. And we need the thread ID, which is the same thread ID that we had before. Now the thread is now updated with the new information from the assistant after the run. So the thread ID was different. When we created the thread, we only had this prompt and the user message. After doing the run actually updates the same thread with now the new assistant response. So you can call the same thread and you'll find a new message inside of the thread, and that's the message you want to query to find out what the assistant has said in its response. So that's how you actually get the assistant's response. So I'm going to now I've written this to return like a tuple object, so I can get the reference and the message text together. So I'm going to just actually do it like this. I'm going to say message text and reference is equals to, and then I'm going to run this function with the thread ID. All right. Okay, let's just run the function with the thread ID and see. All right, so let's see what's happening. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, what's going on here? All right, let's run this line by line. We've got our client object. Let's get our thread messages and see what's going on there. So let's see the length of the thread messages. Can we do that? No. How many messages are in here? Because this should be completed now. Okay. Okay, let's just look at the thread messages on their own and see what's there. Okay. There we go. So the thread messages, there's a message, there's an assistant, content, message content, value, about the Islamic account of creation. I will need another source to provide the information you're looking for. All right, so the response, so I think there's definitely, if we look at the thread messages and we look at the list messages here, Josh, and then we look at the assistant message, which is the list message at 0, and then we look for, so the reference was not there because it wasn't able to find the find. So the reference is only there if it was able to find it. So the message text, because I want to read in here so I can get the text out. So the message text is definitely there, but the citation is not there. It seems the document provided does not contain information about the Islamic account. That's weird because it should have it, right? So that's very weird. Let me try a different prompt. So it says it can't find the Islamic account. So this is business studies. I want to go back into account of creation. Yeah, let me just ask this. Let me append the message. So obviously, we need to figure out why it can't find that. I tested this before and it was able to find it. So maybe because there's multiple documents and it wasn't able to find that specific document in the list of documents. Let's see. Let me see if it can't find anything religious. So let me say prompt 2. Now I'm going to do the second part of our tutorial. No, the last step, which is to actually add to the thread. So the thread has now been appended with the assistant response. In this specific case, the assistant could not find the message within the documents that we've given it, which is weird. Maybe there's something I'm missing over here. But let's religious and scientific creation. So let me say, tell me more about. Tell me more about. All right. So I'm going to create this prompt number 2, and then I'm going to append our messages or our thread with this and see if this time we'll be able to get a response. Okay. So now that we've done that, add messages to the prompt. You just client beta, you add messages, you create a new message, and you with that prompt number 1. Let's see, is that the prompt? I called it prompt number 2. And you enter the thread ID. Okay, so you enter the thread ID and then you say role user, and then you make this prompt number 2. So let's do it like that. Okay, so let's do that. Client beta threads messages create. We create with the thread ID role user, and then this is prompt number 2. So we add a new user message. So we are asking a question again. So we're going to ask now the second question. So this is now how you continue the conversation. Of course, within your application, you're going to find a way to do this almost automatically when you create the chatbot. And we will do this. Maybe we'll do this with even Streamlit, and maybe the next tutorial I'll show you how to do that. So you can put this in the chat so the user themselves only see the message they are typing in and only see the response that comes out, and maybe only have to upload files, and in the background you run all these functions as you need to run them, and you save all your thread IDs where you need to save them, and then the user just sort of enters a prompt and sees a response. The reason why I'm sort of typing all of this in the command line is to actually show you what the functions look like, so that you can understand how the functions work. But within an application environment, you would actually structure this slightly different. Okay, so let me run this. All right. What did I do there? Okay, so I have added the new message to the prompt. After you add the new prompt to the thread, after I've added the new prompt to the thread, I need to actually run the thread again. Okay, so what I need to do, I need to go into the running the assistant. All right, and then I need to run the thread again. So I need to run with the thread ID, with the assistant ID. So I need to actually just run this thing. The old run object is no longer valid, right? You need to actually create a new run object because now you've updated the thread. The thread is different, so you have to run this again. So you need a new run ID. So you need to run it. So every time you run this, even if it was within your application, the next time you run it, it's a whole new run ID. It's not the same. And the old run ID actually expires. So you don't really need to save the run ID except while you're retrieving the run status. After you've retrieved the run status and you've done what you need to do with the run status, you don't need to save the run ID again. You're not going to use it again. And in fact, the run expires and then there's nothing you can do with it anymore. And every time you need to create a new run, right? So I need to create a new run there like that with the same thread ID. The thread ID itself does not change, by the way. You just update it with a new message. So I can use the same thread ID and create a new run. And what I wanted to demonstrate earlier on when I was saying, if you say run.status, the first time it will say queued. So the first time you create the run, actually it's queued and then it's going to be waiting and blah blah blah. So you can wait a little bit while I'm busy talking, like I like to talk too much. We can wait a little bit there, and then we're going to go and check the status of the run again. And now we can update our new run ID, right? And you can say run ID is equals to run.id. Right, so this new run ID will now override the previous run ID I had in the context of the Python. Now, when I use the same run ID now, or run ID there with the same thread ID to check the run, so I can check this. So I need to like query the run again, even though it's the same run, I need to query it again so I can see if the status has changed, right? So now I'm going to, actually let me call it run2. Let me just call it run2. Run1 is equals to, I'm going to call the run again. All right. And now if I say run1.status is in progress, you see? So the first time it was queued, now it's in progress. Okay. So we can wait again and wait for it to run, and then we're going to check it again, and it's either going to still be in progress, or maybe it will be completed, or maybe it would have failed, or whatever. Let's just wait for it for like 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to call it again. Run1 is equals to that. Okay, run1.status. It failed. All right, so this happens, and maybe you can try with perhaps GPT-4. I think GPT-4 probably performs better. I do not run with GPT-4 because it's way too expensive, but I think I've demonstrated how this works. But I'm curious to see this run. I'm going to do it again. Okay, so I'm going to create this run again. All right, so it failed, so we can actually recreate it. All right, and if you do run.status, it should be queued. All right, and then we're going to create the run ID. Run ID is equals to run.id. All right, and then we can see our run ID there, run ID. All right, so that's our run ID. So let's just wait for it. We can query it and wait for it. So we can query it again and see what the status is now, and see if it succeeds this time. So we can say run. Let's try with this run1. Let's see run1.status. It's in progress. Okay. So we're going to wait a little bit longer. So you see what I mean, how the status keeps changing and you have to keep querying it. So within your application, you probably need to write a a timed function that creates a poll that keeps polling the run object after a certain amount of time, maybe every 15 seconds, I would think. And maybe you're going to build your application so that users are not like waiting around a rotating a button. Maybe you want to do it something like they create the chat and then you already take them to a completed page, and then you just say to them, hey, wait, we will let you know once your chatbot is ready, or you have to find a way to, because this is going to take a while, especially if it can fail as often as it's failing, right? So let's see again. Let's try run one again and see if it's completed this time. Run one status. Yes, this time it has completed. Let's hope it found the answer, because it completed the last time and it didn't find the answer. So let's check. After it has completed, what do we do? Remember, how do we see the thing? We don't say run one dot messages dot answer. No, we go and query the thread and look for the assistant message, which is the last message on the thread, and then we look at the text of that message. So I'm going to do this manually again in case there's no reference like the last time, because so maybe you need to have an error handling in here to check if there's annotation or something, because it looks like it's not always there, because if it doesn't find an answer, there's no, so this is also part of, learning how all of this works. So we're going to try and get the thread messages. So the first thing is to try to get the thread messages from the thread ID. So you're listing the messages within the thread ID. That's what this function does. And then after you list the messages, you get the messages.data, the list messages.data. And then after you've done that, you get the first message within the list message.data. We assume that our assistant message is the first message in the list of messages. And then after we have that first message, we're going to try and see the message text first, what the message says. All right. So let's see what the message says. Okay, so this keeps failing. I'm going to assume it's probably because of GPT-3, using GPT-3 instead of GPT-4, or perhaps because it is still in beta. So in this case, I think based on what I've seen, maybe this is not ready for production yet. And putting it within a client application, the number of times it has failed, it has failed for me 2 out of 3 times I get a fail, and 1 out of 3 maybe it succeeds. And even when it succeeds, half the time it has the right answer, and half of the time it didn't find the answer, even though the answer was there in the document. So the only thing I could think of is, yeah, this is still beta. Maybe they're still working on improving the model, or perhaps you just try GPT-4. I haven't tried GPT-4. And the time when I actually got success and how I actually got to these functions is where I uploaded just one PDF document. So I only had one document that it had to look into, and it didn't have a problem finding the information within the one document with GPT-3. Every time it found it. In fact, the success rate was much, much higher. And now with 4 documents, it's struggling, it's failing, or it's not finding the answer. And maybe you can approve the model or whatever, but just play around with it. But this is the functions and how the functions should work. Just keep in mind that this, maybe you want to put it inside of a try catch, so you can catch the error, because this will error out, as we have seen, where the thing has not found a response. Right. So with that, I think I'm going to call it a day. And next week, I will come back with more feedback, because I'll spend the week also looking into it again. So stay tuned, stay subscribed, so you can, so you can catch up with me next week when I give you feedback as to how I solved this problem and how I was able to get a better sort of reliability. Because at this stage, as amazing as this is, I would say it's not quite ready for production yet. Right. So yeah, see you guys next time, and thanks for watching, and goodbye.